Hi, I'm Jim Jonez with Hill.
And I'm Shlomi Ben Abraham with Hill as well.
And we're here to put together a demo showing the advantages of putting SSD drives into a Hill Assured SAN array. What you'll see on this when we get to the demo part of it is a performance improvement of about 20x, 20 times performance improvement. Now, one of the reasons this is so important is that today we're seeing the workloads being a lot more dynamic. Things are changing in real time. And this is driven by factors like the Internet of Things and applications dependent upon the third wave of computing. And that's changing the type of workload that the storage system has to deal with. And so our hybrid system with SSD drives and the real-time tiering really optimizes performance for those situations.
That's correct.
Sometimes people think of SSD drives as being really expensive. And that's true when you compare an SSD drive to a hard drive of the same capacity. But another way to think of it is SSD drives are actually cheaper when you're comparing the performance that you get out of it. So as we look at it, the economics of a hybrid storage array really gets optimized when you blend a system with SSD drives for performance and hard drives for capacity and cost. So that's what we're putting together.
That is true, and I will add one more thing, Jim, to that note, is the majority of the IT shops today think about purchasing a complete array with SSD drives. A complete array with SSD drives in it will be significantly more expensive.
Exactly, and so this hybrid system is a better way to get that across.
Yep.
All right, well, let's start with the baseline system, and Shlomi, why don't you explain the system that we have set up here to start with?
Sure. So what we have here is you can actually see this through the window that we have a 3-chassis system. This is a 4004 system within Hill. The top chassis, as you see, is a 2U24. I actually have 22 drives plugged into it, and you see there's an empty two slot for the drives. The reason we have 22 is because I got an extra 2 SSD drives that I will be plugging in live in a few minutes. But these drives are 600 gig 10K drives. That's the first top chassis. That's also the RAID control itself, which it has 2 controllers or an active-active solution. Mm-hmm. Then it's got the middle chassis, which has got 24 drives, and these are all 600 gig drives, 10K as well. And then we get a third chassis, which that chassis is a JBUD full of 2U12 6 terabyte drives, large form factor.
Right, and the total system in this configuration is about 100 terabytes of raw capacity.
That is correct. So if we actually look at this screenshot, and what you see here, this is the home view. And this home view, we actually call it a dashboard. It actually allows the user to see all the system's performance, capacity, volumes, tiers, and all that. It also has some coloring to it. So if you see it over here, you can see it's got the blue portion of it, which is the archive, the 72K RPMs, and it's got the green portion, which is the 10K drives that we have in there, small form factor, 600 gig. And then the SSDs, which I'll plug in a few minutes, we'll be able to see that, and then will come up in red as a performance tier.
Got it. And then the performance tool that we're using to generate the workload is what here?
IOmeter. Mm-hmm. So we'll be using IOmeter. It's the most common one. There's different tools out there today, but I think IOmeter will give us the best option to see what we were trying to do. Before we walk into the IOmeter, just one more thing. What you see here is you see there's a storage A and a storage B pool. The storage A we're not going to use for this specific test. I still have drives configured in here. You can see the blue portion, which is the standard 72K RPMs. You also see some of the green portion, which is the 10K 600 gig drives. But we're not going to use storage pool A. We're going to use storage pool B, which consists of a 4+2 RAID 5 configuration on the large form factor, and in RAID 6, and a RAID 5 of an 8+1 of the 10K 600 gig drives. And if we go ahead and pull the IOmeter, so yes, what we're going to use here is we're actually using an IOmeter, which is the most default application that the majority of the users are familiar with. What we're going to do here is we're actually going to go and start the test. And what I wanted to show here is that we're running off a volume called E that is running from pool B. There's about 32 outstanding IOs at this time. And the specific access configuration that I have here is we wanted to actually stress the system and the drives as much as possible. So what we did is we created the extreme case scenario where we are actually running 100% writes and 100% random. At this specific test.
Right, and this workload would be a demanding workload, say with a database, kind of a high transaction database type of application.
That is correct. Anything that's random and small block sizes, right?
Got it.
So majority of it is the databases such as OLTP, Exchange, and Oracle. It could be some other things as well. What I'm trying to simulate here is a random workload with very small block sizes, with 100% write. And the reason we're doing it, we really want to extremely stress the system and the drives to really be able to show you how big of a benefit the two SSDs will give you.
Good. Yep.
All right, so we go back to the results display, and what we see here is you can actually see that within this configuration, and I want us to look at this bar down here. This bar shows you the tier IOPS. So you can actually see that 100% of the IOPS are coming from the green portion of the pool, and as you can see here, we got the blue and the green, which means is we're using about 500 IOPS a second, and all these 500 IOPS per second are actually coming from the 8+1 configuration of the 10K 600 gig drives that we have. And we're getting about anywhere between 550 to 600 IOPS per second. And we're also getting about, the average response time is about anywhere between 50 to 60 milliseconds. I'm going to go ahead and take these two SSDs, go to the back of that system, plug them in, and then we'll add them into my pool. And that's all done live while the application is still going. And I'll be able to show you how we increase the performance from 600 IOPS to almost 20,000 IOPS or 18,000 IOPS. And we'll be able to reduce the latencies from about 50 milliseconds to sub 2 milliseconds. So somewhere around 1.5, 1.7 milliseconds.
Good. Well, let's see what we get.
All right, well, I'll be back in a second.
All right. And as Shlomi said, he's updating this system live. So there's no downtime. We're not taking the system offline. We're not reconfiguring things. That will happen automatically once he adds these drives into the pool. And you'll see that happen dynamically as this comes together.
All right, so we're back.
Good.
And what you can see here is you can actually see the system, and I've added these two drives into the end of that first chassis. And what we're back into that front view of the system, and you can see those two empty slots here. And I just plugged them in. It takes it a few seconds once the system scans it and picks it up. And in a few seconds, the two SSDs will pick it up here, and they just appeared over here. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to go to the pools. And we're going to add, this is the pool A that we said we're not going to touch for now. These are the additional drives that we have within the system. Pool B, where we got the 7K and the 10K drives, we're going to go ahead and add the SSDs into it. So we're going to go and add a disk group. We're going to use the virtual mode of the system. We're going to call this SSD-pool B-1. And I'm going to go ahead and choose RAID 1 for that. And I'm going to go ahead and choose the SSD over here on the right, and the second one as well. It's a RAID 1 1+1 configuration. And you want to click Add. Now once this is happening, it's going to rebuild, it's going to initialize the SSDs. It takes about anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes to initialize, depending on the SSD size. These are 400 gig SSDs. It'll probably take us about 8 to 9 minutes. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to show you that this is initializing here. There's still no improvements on the IO meter side, and you can see that everything is still being served. All the IOPS are still being served from the standard tier, from the 10K drives. And you can see that this is actually being initialized now. So this is actually a prep before the initialization. In a few seconds, we'll see initializing. It will start counting, and we'll get back to this, and we'll show you some other portion of the initializations. And then that's when we'll see the performance improvements on the test itself. And again, just want to mention it again, and you can see here that it started the initialization, that this is all happening while the application is still going. So as far as the application or the business case, the business and the application are not even aware that we've added the SSDs, that we're going to boost their performance and their capacity. This will all happen live while the application is still running in the background.
Right. That's cool. So while this is running and initializing, let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the algorithm, the real-time tiering algorithm that we call RealTier. Explain how that works, Shlomi.
Sure. I think the biggest thing that it's important to mention here is the way DotHill implements this real-time tiering solution. So we got two solutions out there, or two different options of doing it. There's SSD caching and SSD tiering, as we call it. Mm-hmm. SSD caching is something that some of the competitors actually offer today on a more wide range, but it only helps you on the read. So it helps you on read ahead, it helps you on read intensive workloads. What we're trying to do here is what we did in this test. We did 100% write and 100% random. So basically, having a read cache system wouldn't really help you with that, because we're writing 100%, so that wouldn't really help you. Right. So our second option within the tiering is SSD tiering, and within the SSD tiering, we're actually able to serve both reads and writes and improve the performance on both the reads and the writes. So that's the first portion of it. The second portion of it that we do pretty different than what the other competitors are doing is we do this in real time. And a lot of the other competitors would say real time, but when you think about it, what is really real time at the competitor side? Well, it is automated on their side. They still require you to create some sort of a schedule. So whether it's once a day, once an hour, at noon, at midnight, or at every given time, where within our system, within Hill's real-time tiering, we actually do that on a 5-second interval. So we have some sort of a daemon that will wake up every 5 seconds and we'll examine. We have something that's called a report card. So every page or every set amount of blocks have a report card, and we actually wake up, examine, and say, do we need to promote something between a 72K to a 10K drive, or between a 10K drive into the SSD, or do we need to depromote something from the SSDs down to the 10K, or so on. So that's pretty unique, and it's pretty different in the way that we do it.
Right, so the real-time aspect is what allows the system to learn in real time is where the data, hot data is, and respond to that. Versus these other tiering systems that operate in a batch mode, you have to wait for that to occur,
That's
and
correct.
then you've optimized for the data that maybe occurred yesterday,
That's exactly
if that's
correct.
when you ran that batch operation.
And most IT shops will tell you, well, today's hot data is not tomorrow's hot data, and what I need hot today is not what I need hot in an hour, right?
Right, I
so
can
you
relate
do
to
want
that,
that,
yeah.
exactly. So the 5-second interval makes a huge, huge difference in today's environment.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's see what results we're getting at this point.
So Jim, we're back now after a couple of minutes, and you can see that initialization of the SSD tier is actually at about 63%. You can see that we're actually growing in this bar. So you can see that almost 50% of the bar now is green and 50% of it is red. The red portion just shows that half of the IOPS that are being served from the application now are coming from the SSDs. Remember how we said blue was the archive, green was the 10K drive standard, and then the red is the SSD. So now actually the system is serving for that purpose of the test.
From the
serving
SSDs.
All
being
from the
served
SSDs.
SSDs.
Everything is being served from the SSDs. And let's go to the IO meter and you'll see the big increase in that. You could actually see that the initialization of the SSDs are actually at about 95%. But what's nice to see is now that my IOPS bar shows you that all of the IOPS that are being served right now from the system are being served from the red portion, which is basically the performance SSD tier. And if we go back to the IO meter, you'd be able to see here that the total IOPS that we're actually seeing, we're getting about 18.5 thousand IOPS per second. And if you look at the latencies, we're actually shrunk down to 1.7 milliseconds. If we go back to what we had before, we had 500 IOPS. We're now getting 18,000 IOPS. We're at about 50 milliseconds latencies. We're at about 1.7 milliseconds latencies now. So it's a pretty significant improvement.
Right, so not only higher performance, but faster response time.
That's correct.
And that's the benefit you get by putting SSDs in here. All right, well, just to wrap up then, what you've seen here today is by adding SSDs into the array with the RealStore software, we're able to get about a 20x performance improvement. And for the system that we're looking at here, those SSDs would add about 20% to the price of the overall system. So we think that's a pretty good ratio.
Definitely is, if you ask any IT shop. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, be sure to watch the other videos that we have on the other elements of the RealStore software. We look forward to seeing you soon.